G'day everyone. Welcome to day 5 of the Gut Check series here with ZOE. My name is Dan Churchill. I'm a chef and a host of the Epic Table podcast. And you may have seen me with Dr. William Lee in a previous episode of what we're doing with this wonderful Gut Check series, talking all goodness around how to apply the food that we talk about on ZOE based on your own recordings to help you guys optimize the best thing for your health going forward. And today I'm joined by two pretty amazing individuals, both in respective expertise of their fields. I'm joined by Professor Paul Franks and Raphael Vallet. Now, is that Vallet? Is that how I pronounce it correctly? Is my French correct?
It's Vala.
Vala.
You're close. You're very close.
My apologies. Always said I love to kind of, really execute well in a French accent and take my Australian to one step further. But gentlemen, I'm really excited to have the community of ZOE join us today because we're covering a topic that is of just so much regard right now and something that has such a profound impact on our health, the choices in food that we have. But ultimately, it's one thing that we can truly control and something that is quite cheap to do. So it's very accessible for all of us. Now, before we begin, Raphael, it would be great to get a bit of background on who you are, your role, and your relationship with ZOE. So, mate, do you want to kind of give us a bit of background on this lovely French accent and who you are?
Sure. So I'm currently a sleep researcher at the University of Berkeley in California. So I'm West Coast based, but I'm originally from France and I got a PhD in France in neuroscience. So my expertise is more in sleep than in, glucose and diabetes. But I think I've became really more and more interested in that topic in recent years. And so I had this opportunity to work with ZOE and Professor Paul Franks on that specific study about sleep and glucose. And so that was a really great opportunity for me.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I think the area of sleep is just so profound. And we know over the last 12 months, particularly even 18 months, as obviously the world's gone into lockdowns, we've had more time to focus on this area. It's been amazing to see the transformation people have placed on their sleep because they effectively said, I can now have the time to do so. I don't have to get up and go to work. I can work from home, but health has been such a big topic as well. So that's awesome. Professor Paul, mate, you yourself have been involved in a number of written work, particularly with Matthew Walker himself as well, mate. Do you want to give a bit of a background on your amazing pedigree?
Yeah, so I've been a professor at 2 universities for the past 11 years. One is Lund University in Sweden, which some people would have heard of, and the other that I think everybody would have heard of is the Harvard School of Public Health in Boston. My background is really in genetics, actually. That's where my training was from Cambridge in the UK 20 years ago. But since then, I've been focusing a lot on this topic called precision medicine. And within that concept, we have precision nutrition, which I think we're going to talk a bit about today, and how that really features in the concept of sleep and general well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's actually really interesting to see. I've always loved when I see professors and researchers jump around to different locations and do their own thing, because you can see that each university and faculty have their expertise in their field. And following what you've done, mate, is pretty exceptional, because I know a lot of work goes into just the behind the scenes of what we get to read later on. So I appreciate what you've done, and definitely interested in the precision nutrition. I want to start the conversation talking specifically about sleep. And I know there's a lot of research that we've seen, and even ZOE's looking to really crack down on for our community, particularly around responses to glucose, our hormones, and relationship to how much sleep we are getting. So I want to begin by saying that maybe you with Raphael, we can discuss maybe just some key factors that we do know about sleep and the things that we should be targeting to look to optimize our overall daily energy for sleep. Are there key factors that you can just kind of list off briefly?
Sure. So you mentioned hormones, and we know that sleep is involved in regulations of hormones that regulates your appetite and your hunger. And so 2 of these hormones that I think are important to mention, one of them is called leptin. And what it does is that it signals to your brain that you're full and that you no longer want to eat. And we know that if you sleep deprived individuals for a few days, you get a decrease of leptin in the bloodstream. So in other words, it takes more time for you to feel that you're full and that you no longer want to eat. And by contrast, we know that there is a second hormone. It's called ghrelin, and it really sounds, these hormones really sound like trolls from fantasy books or something like that. But ghrelin does the opposite effect. So it tells your brain that you need to eat more, you want to eat more. And what we've seen is that if you sleep deprived people for a few days, you have an increase of ghrelin by almost 30% in the bloodstream. And so this kind of inverse relationship between leptin and ghrelin, what it does is that ultimately when you're sleep deprived, you're gonna eat more calories than if you sleep. And it's not just about, trying to compensate for the fact that you're awake longer. Because on average, people that are sleep deprived will eat about 300 kilocalories more per day, which is more than simply what you just burn by being awake. And so that's why we know that this is one mechanism by which we know that sleep deprivation can lead to obesity and other, metabolic disease.
Yeah, it's very interesting. First and foremost, the way you pronounce Ghrelin is so much better than I've ever been able to pronounce it, and I'm sure Professor Paul can agree with me. But it's a very interesting dynamic, the relationship between what our hormones are meant to be doing, their signal calling, and we can see that obviously as the important relationship that leptin and ghrelin do play in telling us when we are either full or when we do need to eat more. So when those receptors and the relationship between those messengers actually is obviously out of balance, as you said, we are likely to eat more. Now, if we look at, I think the research paper you're referring to is if we look at that, you're eating extra 300 calories a day if you were just, I believe, sleeping under 6 hours. And please jump in, Raphael, when I'm incorrect here, but it's under 6 hours.
I think. Yeah, 4 to 5 hours for a few days.
Right. So if you're doing that over the course of a week, then unfortunately you're looking at an increase in a full day of eating just simply by not sleeping correctly. So if you're someone who's trying to be really conscious of making sure your energy's right, you're not losing, you're maybe looking to lose a bit of weight just by simply not sleeping enough. You're having an impact on your overall signal callers that'll let you know when you are too full. And therefore you end up eating more. And as a result, you have a full extra day of eating that you didn't even know about.
And I think it gets worse because it's not that you just want to eat more of that, avocado toast or very healthy salad. You want to eat more of very high calorie kind of junk food. And we know that this is because in the brain, you have an overactivation of regions that are involved in reward and reward seeking. So you're essentially more likely to want to buy, that kind of junk food that you would never want to eat if you're actually like well rested. So, not all calories created equals, I think you could say. And when you're sleep deprived, you're more likely to aim for the very high calorie, very, sugary, kind of bad, junk food.
Absolutely. And I find what's so interesting as well is trying to find that realistic expectation of us all to get enough sleep. And I'd be lying if I'm telling you right here that I get more than 7 hours a night every single night of the week. I think we've got to be realistic about the situation, but it's more or less highlighting the importance that we should play on actually just focusing the fact to do as best as we can to get to above that 7 hour, 8 hour mark as realistic as we can. Now, in saying that as well, it is one thing to get the sufficient amount of sleep and obviously make sure that our hormones and everything else are being optimized. The next thing is actually talking about the time at which you are sleeping and trying to make up sleep. Now, if I'm someone who slept for say 5 hours one night and say I wanted to sleep in the next day just to make up for it, can I actually make up for that amount of sleep that I lost the previous day?
I wish I could say yes, but sadly we have some studies. I didn't do these studies, but we know, that there are some studies showing that you can not perfectly catch up on sleep. So it's not like a one relationship. I mean, sure, you can compensate, and that's what most people do in the weekend. Like teenagers will sleep until noon to try to catch up for that sleep deprivation during the week. And so you can catch up to a certain extent, but you would never be able to fully catch up. And we know, for example, there was a really nice study a few years ago that showed that when it comes to the metabolic dysfunction that comes with sleep deprivation, you can never really catch up on that. So you can even though you're trying to compensate, you cannot really catch up on accumulated dysfunction caused by sleep deprivation during the week.
So ultimately, if someone says, oh, I know I had a big week, but I'm just going to wait until the weekend to catch up on it. Or say you went out Friday night, unfortunately, just sleeping on Sunday will not simply allow you to make up for what you previously did. Now, Professor Paul, what does this mean with our relationship with responses to, you know, fat and glucose with the blood, mate? Because these are telling things we obviously do on ZOE. We look at the ways that people can truly understand how their fat and glucose responses are. And we look obviously then to take that into account to improve that. Now, this is something that I think is often oversight, and obviously you've done a lot of work in this space, but how can we look at, how does this affect those kind of responses in general?
Yeah, so the work that we've done, so the work with ZOE is this PREDICT trial, which you've, I'm sure, already introduced people to, but you know, it's a very large study, very, very detailed measurements. And with that, we're able to study all kinds of components of particularly diet and lifestyle, and in this case, sleep, in relation to energy metabolism. So the stuff in our bloodstream that allows us to move around and do things with our bodies require energy for that. Now, you know, it turns out that, as Raphael has already explained, that sleep's not very good for your energy metabolism. It messes up certain hormones in your body, and those hormones interact with metabolites like glucose, to influence the way in which our bodies work. So what we found in the PREDICT trial is that people who tend to have disrupted sleep or have what's called a late sleep offset, which means that they tend to go to bed a bit later than they would normally from time to time. So they have these variations in sleep that push their bedtime routines a bit later, and they get up a bit later. That influences the way that they respond to their breakfast the next day. And so we gave people a bunch of different breakfasts, all of very carefully measured macronutrient content in the form of breakfast muffins. And then we assessed how different types of energy within those muffins, mainly fat and carbohydrates, and to some extent proteins and fiber, how that then influences our blood glucose levels. And what we showed is that when you have this kind of sleep disruption where you go to bed late and get up late, then that is particularly problematic for your blood glucose when you have a very high carbohydrate breakfast, a very glucose rich breakfast. And to put this into a sort of real world setting, to take it out of this carefully controlled clinical trial context, let's think about what people do often when they've had a really bad night's sleep. One of the first things people tend to do is to take, you know, an energy drink, right? That's not at all uncommon, particularly with younger people. You take an energy drink to boost your energy, right? But the problem with that is it can really send your blood glucose levels off. And that, of course, isn't, if you keep doing that, it's not a good thing in the long run. That's ultimately what can lead to damage to the vessels in the body, and may lead you to developing diabetes, which, of course, none of us want that. So that's really a really interesting finding that we pulled out of the PREDICT trial that is about to be published, that really shows how sleep and breakfast meal composition interact to affect our blood glucose levels.
It's very interesting. I think it gives us all a bit of a second guessing, if you will, into if we do have a night out, what we should be actually eating in the morning to optimize, you know, as best as we can. And we all want to go out and have fun with our friends and socialize. Just got to be conscious now of some of these things, because we're talking about, you mentioned diabetes. These are diseases that unfortunately aren't just singular to themselves. You know, we've seen that diabetes has the ability to also relate to things like Alzheimer's. We've got the chronic diseases in general, cardiovascular, heart related. Like they're all, unfortunately, to some degree, related to the lifestyle choices that we have and make play every single day. Now, in saying that, did you, in the research, do we actually, I know this is probably not a question that we want to encourage, but just out of pure interest, if we do have a night out, is there, in the research, a composition that we should be aiming for based on what would be the best response for our body, with respect to still trying to optimize performance or diminish any, how do I say, negative effects of the night before as best as possible?
So I'm going to give you a very sort of public health response to that, and then I'll let Raphael give you the life hacks that he knows about when it comes to sleep. So, you know, my view of, you know, generally speaking, when you talk about people's health in society is, as you say, you've got to be realistic, right? We're not all going to live like, you know, sort of monastic lifestyles where we're very, very disciplined about how we live. Some people will do that. Some people like to do that. Most of us do like to have a night out, do like to indulge here and there and occasionally. So I think actually, yeah, that's what life is about, right? It's about enjoying yourself and not always sticking to a very rigorous routine. So I think we have to be realistic about that.
Sure.
And of course, there are, if we're going to take, in some senses, away from our health, then we should, I think, double down on other elements that will give to our health. And so, it does make sense, particularly in the context of the research I've just described, to say, okay, if we have had a bad night, and it may not be because we're indulgent, it may be because we have small children and they disrupt our sleep, or we work night shift, or there are any number of reasons, we fly transatlantic, these kind of things, then just make sure the next day you're not having a very sugary breakfast. Okay, double down on the quality of your breakfast the next day. Focus on more fibrous and wholesome breakfast foods. And I won't try to pretend that will fix a problem if you have chronic sleep disturbance, but it makes sense to not add to the problem by overindulging in Cocoa Pops and Coca-Cola and other types of energy drinks. So that's my general comment on that, but I think Raphael probably has a whole bunch of life hacks that he can tell you about that might mean you can go a bit deeper.
No, that's a very good point. One thing that I could add is that if you had a bad night, you should not double down on caffeine also, to try and compensate for that, just because we know that caffeine can lead to this vicious cycle in which, because you ingested a lot of caffeine that day, you're going to have trouble, falling asleep and getting good quality sleep on the next day. And so when you're going to wake up the following day, you're going to be even more tired, which will lead you to, want to drink even more caffeine. So it's kind of a vicious cycle. And so, as Paul said, I think if you had a bad night, it's not the end of the world. Just know that, your brain is going to want you to eat a lot of high calorie food. Your reward system is going to be a little bit biased. So you have to be very careful about that and try to, basically stick to your usual routine. Do not increase the amount of coffee or caffeine that you drink, and try to avoid, of course, very bad nutritious breakfast, sugary treats or the kind of energy drinks. I think is the worst case.
It's interesting because I was reading a review recently, and it was talking about the correlation between individuals who are who are sleeping insufficiently. So again, within that 5-hour range, and what they're typically eating. And it's still up for debate, the relationship, whether it's causality or just a relationship. But it is noted that people who are eating less, sleeping less, are choosing to have the high sugary refined foods. And unfortunately, that includes those energy drinks and some highly processed ingredients. And this is where, we're very, very much educational on helping people get more dietary fiber, as you said, Professor Paul, and making sure we increase our abundance of whole food plants as best as possible. And ultimately, controlling the controllable is pretty important. One question I do want to quickly touch upon, though, and this is, I know we kind of talked about the 8-hour sleeping cycle. I'm going to direct this to you, Dr. Raphael. We're talking about how even though you may get the 8-hour sleeping window, my apologies, it also has an effect on when you are actually sleeping based on your slow wave and your REM sleep. So I don't want to go too much into detail on that, but just want to highlight the fact that obviously we discussed if you're trying to sleep in and you go to bed later versus also maybe going to bed too early and waking up early, how this has an effect on those two huge aspects of why we actually want to sleep. And then in turn, how that can affect obviously our again, what we said previously with what the choices of food we are having. So I think I want to quickly highlight REM is more prevalent in which period
at the end of
sleeping?
the night. At the end of the night. So REM stands for rapid eye movements, and it's because you have these crazy, eye movements, and you can really see them, like if you look at babies or even pets. And so REM is mostly at the end of the night, and that's typically when you have these very vivid dreams also. And so you don't have a lot of REM at the beginning of the night, but you do have a lot of REM sleep at the end of the night. By contrast, what we call deep non-rapid eye movement sleep mostly occurs at the beginning of the night, and this is when we can see, if I put electrodes on your head, Dan, I would see some huge slow oscillations, slow waves in your electrical brain activity. And this deep non-rapid eye movement sleep is very important for like body restoration, and typically it's not really associated with any dreams, so you kind of lose consciousness during that time. And so I think it's a really interesting and important point what you just said about, like, you know, when you go to eat, when you go to sleep, how will this affect like the different stages of sleep that you get? Because, you know, I know that some people will be like, oh, I'm gonna wake up at 5 a.m. so I can get, you know, a good start on my day and I can do workout. And then, but the thing is that if you do that, and if you do that, you may still, you know, get your 7, maybe even 8 hours of sleep, which sounds fine. But the real issue is that you're gonna cut off a lot of the rapid eye movement sleep that mostly occurs at the end of the night. So even though you still get the 7 hours of sleep, maybe the proportion of REM sleep that you got during that night will decrease from 20%, which is, you know, the usual for most people, to 10%. And this is not something you want, because we know that REM sleep is super important for mood and also for the cardiovascular system. So, you know, I think it's very important to keep that in mind, and you need to find the optimal schedule for you. You know, everyone has kind of a different chronotype. Some people likes to go to bed earlier and wake up earlier. Some people likes to, you know, go to bed later. So you need to find what's best for you and try to keep to the schedule. When it comes to, you know, sleep quality, I think consistency is key. And so you really want to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, even on weekends. And that will really like tells your brain that, you know, this is when I sleep. Now, you know, do whatever magic you're doing when I'm sleeping. Make sure that I'm getting my deep sleep, my rapid eye movement sleep. But, you know, this is how I want to do it.
That's a great takeaway. It's like, you know, obviously get as much sleep as you can based on, you know, what's happening, control what you can. I don't have kids yet, so, you know, I can't speak to those who have parents and, you know, the newlyborns and whatnot, but ideally try and keep into routine. Think of your sleep as a routine. It should be. So that's a great takeaway. Professor Paul, mate, I think something that I'm really excited to talk to you about specifically, I know you touched on it earlier, was, you know, glucose regulation and of course, precision nutrition and this whole thing that we've got going on, mate. Do you want to give a bit of a background on that? Because when the team introduced me to this, I was extremely excited.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that it's an incredibly tricky equation to solve, what food is right for you as an individual, as opposed to having more population level guidelines around diet. And what we found, and we've, you know, been working on this with ZOE, with Tim Spector and others over the last few years, is that having set up this very, very big and comprehensive precision nutrition trial, is that actually the standard nutrition guidelines, which you might refer to as back of pack information. So when you look at what's on the back of the pack and then you relate that to the nutritional guidelines, that one size fits all approach to public health and diet, it is of value, right? So that's the first thing to say. We shouldn't disregard that. We shouldn't say that none of that makes any sense and it's not evidence-based medicine. It is. But what we also showed, and this is in a Nature Medicine paper that was published about a year and a half ago, is that there's a lot of other information that you can use to guide predictions around how you will respond to different types of food. And that's what precision nutrition is. It's really trying to understand for you what kind of guidance is the best guidance, not what's right for society, for populations as a whole, what's right for you. And so we did this big trial, very detailed measurements, 1,100 people from the UK and the US. And what we're able to do is to show that we can predict for you as an individual with pretty high certainty which types of foods will minimize your blood glucose variations when you eat the food, but also your blood lipid variations. And we're really interested in those two things, triglycerides in the blood, the fatty particles that can, when at high levels for a long time, can lead to atherosclerosis or vessel disease and heart disease. And then blood glucose variation, which can also lead to damage to the vessels and arteries and cause heart disease, but ultimately can lead to diabetes. And diabetes has lots of nasty complications associated with it beyond heart disease. So we showed that a few things. So one is that we can predict which types of food are best for you as an individual, but we also showed that there are some people who have what we call glycemic dips, And so ultimately, when you eat food, your blood glucose is going to go up because you're putting energy into your mouth. It's going through your gut and it's going to come out into your bloodstream at some level. So your blood glucose and your lipids will go up if they're in the foods that you're eating. But some people's peak and then it comes right back down again. It actually goes much lower than it was before they'd eaten. And that's what we call glycemic dipping. And that's a really important phenomenon because what that does is it drives your hunger later, right? So these people who have these real excursions with their glucose dip down low, they tend to be hungrier, they tend to eat more later, and they tend to have a shorter duration between meals. And so it's not a good feature of your metabolism. And that's one of the missions of ZOE is to really try to understand what food does to your individual blood glucose variation and how tailoring your diet to make it more optimal will minimize these excursions, because these excursions matter. They're not only important for your overall health in terms of your biological health, but they're also important in terms of how you feel, whether you're adequately sort of satisfied with the food that you've eaten and whether you have cravings or not, and these kind of things. So that's been a big focus of the research that we've been doing. And for those who are in the academic world, they may well have read the papers that have been published on this in Nature Medicine, Nature Metabolism, and so on. But this is the type of work that we've been doing, and we're really interested in just trying to improve health overall through more targeted nutritional guidelines.
Yeah, I'm really glad, mate. Firstly, I've actually never heard of glycemic dipping before. So to hear that as a marker for potentially a problematic issue is amazing. And now the fact that we can identify this, particularly with the works that we do with ZOE in our CGMs and whatnot, which is really exciting. I love the fact you highlighted the fact that no one is the same. And I know it sounds like we know that, but by looking at the back end of a packet, obviously it's conforming us to the idea that we all want the same RDI, the same recommended daily intake of certain things such as dietary fiber, carbohydrates, etc. What I love is that I'm so big on bio-individuality, trying to find the right thing that works for you. We know that due to that amazing UK twin registry study between those wonderful twins, identifying the fact that despite being identical, they had two different gut makeups, which is extraordinary. To think the DNA is the same, and then to see that their gut microbiomes is vastly different. And we saw the lifestyle factors they both had. I'm pretty sure, were you involved with that study as well, Professor Paul?
Sorry, which one was that?
Is the UK Twins Registry study. I think Tim Spector was one leading that one.
So we've certainly, so some of the research we've collaborated on where Tim has used the UK Twins Registry, but I haven't worked with him on the microbiome study that you're talking about. Of course, we've done that within Predict, that has some in it, but not the overall registry that he's been publishing on over the years.
It's just so interesting to see that and take that. And now you're applying the same concept to the fact that we're looking at glucose responses and how we're all different and how it's important for us to really identify that. And I think one thing that I've highlighted is, you look at a banana, for example, or an apple, and so these dips that you're talking about, or the different levels of peaks, will all be different between individuals. Now, what do you, in your research and when you're looking at glucose, what do you see is something that is a key takeaway for people to truly understand? Obviously, the obvious ones is refined sugar. We should obviously avoid as a whole. But are there things that people have to be really cautious of that we don't know yet, and then have been in published papers that are not as obvious when it comes to consuming foods as a generalist view? I know we're talking about trying to be as individual as we can, but as a generalist view, are there things that you found that are very interesting that maybe people don't know?
Yeah, but let me just speak to the point that you made about use example of bananas and apples. And actually there's in the world that I work in, there's a sort of banana and cookie effect, which is often talked about, which comes from a famous paper published by an Israeli team a few years ago. So actually, it isn't that I will have a very, very different response to you when I eat a banana or an apple or a cookie, but I may have a more exaggerated or a more suppressed response than you. And that I think is important, because otherwise people tend to think that we're so different. We're all so different. We're not all so different. And that's why standard nutritional guidelines mean something, right? Because we're not all different. But on the other hand, there's a huge margin there that isn't taken care of with standard nutritional guidelines. Nevertheless, you asked me the question, what are the general recommendations? I think we live in a very exciting time, because of course we're all interested, well, many of us are interested in health. I won't say everyone is, but many of us are interested in our own personal health. But we're also talking a lot about the environment these days. And actually, one of the really remarkable things is that, every day we consume food, and that does have a huge impact on our health and on the environment. And if you combine both of those together, what you would probably recommend is to move more towards plant-based diets, because generally speaking, the consumption of energy and the production of greenhouse gases is much less with plant-based foods. So as a very, very general rule of thumb, lean into plant-based foods and steer away from, even if they're plant-based, processed foods. And most people will benefit from that. Now, some people will benefit more or less, and some people will do much better with certain combinations of those foods than others. But as a general principle, leaning into plant-based and less processed foods is definitely good for ourselves and good for the world.
Absolutely, mate. Get more dietary fiber. Sorry, go on, Dr. Raphael.
Sorry, no, I just wanted to add one point to this, is that so far we've mostly talked about, going back to sleep, obviously, which is my field, but so far we've mostly talked about how, sleep impacts food and, our reaction to food. But I think going back to your point, we could also look at how what you eat impacts how you're going to sleep. And I know of some studies that have shown that if you eat too much fat or too much refined sugar for dinner in the evening, you're going to have a hard time falling asleep and you're going to have a worse sleep quality. And this is mostly because, if you have like a very rich dinner like that with lots of sugar, lots of fat, you increase your metabolic demands. And what it will do is that your body temperature will increase and your heart rate will also increase. And these are the two conditions that you really don't want when you're going to sleep. You should have the opposite. You should have a lower body temperature, so your temperature decrease as you're falling asleep, and your heart rate should also go down when you're falling asleep. So, I think also one thing to consider is what you eat for dinner, because this is also going to impact how you sleep. And it seems that at least for dinner, fat and refined sugar are, probably some of the worst food that you can eat. And I know that there are, different categories of fat. I think you and Paul are, much more expert than me on that. So I'm sure that not all fats, are as bad. Some are probably good, but yeah, something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. I was, as you were saying, I'm very interested. Obviously, in my line of work, I talk about making sure you optimize sleep through the food you are actually consuming, and identifying that you're not eating a main meal with, an hour and a half before bed. 2 hours is the last bite. Realistically, you should be doing it. Professor Paul, have you actually done any research in looking at the response time of glucose just before bed and what happens based on your meal?
Oh, so you, so you mean, so feeding people before bedtime, looking at glycemic response and then seeing how they sleep? No. I mean, I'm going to come clean here. So I've done an awful lot of research around diabetes and metabolism and precision nutrition. Yeah. My sort of foray into the sleep world has been in the last year and a half, working with Raphael and with Matt Walker. And so first of all, I've been on a real learning journey through that work, and very excited about that. But one of the things that I've really taken away from this, and I've done done a lot of Ironman triathlons and ultra running, all this kind of stuff. And my professional life has been, all about health and diabetes and nutrition, this kind of stuff. But one of the things that I've repeatedly done, which I think many people have done, is push sleep to one side and said, the mantra, I sleep when I'm dead. I'm going to run longer and harder, or I'm going to eat a little bit more healthily, and then I can get away with sleeping less. And I think that the one thing that I've really learned from working with Matt and Raphael is actually sleep is the other pillar of health beyond diet and exercise, right? And I think people are starting to come around to that. But really, if you want to optimize your health, pay attention to sleep. Don't push it back. Don't make it the thing you compromise in order to be able to do other things. It really should help enhance your life, not something that you neglect. And so that's my way of coming clean and telling you I haven't done a lot of sleep research actually. But but
the papers you have done are amazing, mate. And like, I know you co-authored this book and done a lot of work in correlation. But I think what I've been reading, some of the stuff done and even self, Raphael, I think there's so many aspects of our health that are still to be discovered. But in the work that we look at the human body, you've got so many levels. I almost look at hormones as like a surface level aspect. Then you dive deeper right into at the cellular level of what's going on at the cells. And I think you can look at mitochondria, we can look at the organelles, we can look at, and that to me, and even that's probably still surface level if we really want to think about it. But ultimately, like, I look at people like yourselves who are leading the way and helping us conform the right ideas for ourselves. This is all about trying to help people find, what works for them. That's what ZOE is ultimately about. And, both through understanding our sleep patterns and also through opportunities like the research you're doing with precision nutrition, we're able to do that. And I'm excited. I'm absolutely excited to know that we're just honestly at the very start of a journey. It's truly exciting in the fact that we can now, like for me, for so long, I've said to people, how do I know what foods are right for me? And I've said for so long, listen to your gut. And I still want people to listen to their gut. It's an amazing subjective means. But now we can actually say, try ZOE, because ultimately we can give you a definitive response to understanding how your fat response is going, how your glucose response is going, and also look at your gut microbiome as well. So I'm pumped. I'm absolutely pumped to be involved with both you guys doing these kind of works and just be sitting on the sidelines and reading papers. So
Look, I mean, I think we're sort of, we're in an era now where the quality of the data is actually becoming really good, right? And
yes.
certainly, I think people have got a little bit fed up with all of the, sort of contradictions around diet that's come out of science or pseudoscience, in the past. But we're now at a point where, these really big studies, really comprehensive studies are being done now. And the National Institutes of Health in the US has just prioritized $30 million for precision nutrition research. So it's actually, it's getting to a level now where it's being recognized as really a credible area of research. And I think, of course, I'm a huge advocate of the work that Zoe's been doing and the PREDICT trial, and it is the leading trial globally on precision nutrition. But there are other excellent studies out there that have been done, many very, very talented scientists. And I think as the community of researchers and clinical practitioners, for that matter, working in and around precision health start to come together and the quality of the data improves, that will only be good for society. It's a very exciting time, actually.
And with that, Paul, like what can we see in terms of with that research and that funding? What are we excited to see? What's going to be happening with precision nutrition?
Yeah, so I mean, so monitoring is digital monitoring is a really key thing, actually, and the technologies are improving a lot. You mentioned CGMs or continuous glucose monitors a moment ago. Over time, they've improved a lot in terms of the reliability of the monitors, the feedback, the estimate of blood glucose that comes out of them. There are even, Apple has put a lot of money down on optical sensing of glucose. I'm not sure many people really working in glucose metabolism so on have a lot of faith in that method, but you can imagine that if it can be done at scale and it's reasonably good, that could be really important too. So technologies are developing a lot, particularly when it comes to monitoring health. So I think that will be really important when it comes to prevention of disease, precision nutrition being a key part of that. The other part, of course, is, have we got really good data? And if we have really good data, which we're starting to get out of trials like PREDICT, do we have the competence to actually process those data? Do we have the data analysts who can do the work? And we're in an era now where machine learning is a really big thing, or deep learning, AI technologies are really, really big. And that's really come out of this wonderful collaboration that really spun initially out of the Human Genome Project 20 years ago, that really sort of triggered this. So these collaborations between physicists and engineers who are coming into medicine, and they're bringing astrophysics analytical methods into health, and instead of looking at stars and systems in the universe, they're actually using those technologies to look at cells and metabolites and features of our biology. So we're in this incredible collision between all of these really interesting things that are going on at the moment: development of technologies, availability of big data, and then really interesting, innovative analytical techniques. And when you put all of that together, of course, we're making considerable progress in our understanding of human health. And that's why it's such an exciting time to be a researcher in this field. And I hope it's exciting for people who look in on that, who want to learn, they're not scientists, but they want to learn about their health. So there's so much going on at the moment, makes it super exciting.
Yeah, we're all like honestly, I'm so pumped. Anytime we talk about sleep or glucose responses and anything like this that can help optimize not athletes, or people who are at a high level, but the everyday individual, it's amazing because we now have quantifiable data to, you know, support what we are talking about. And gentlemen, I could speak to both of you for another 2 hours and all this topic, but I know you've got other things to do. So before we go, where could people, you know, find you? What's the best way to reach out and yeah, let people know that just at home where the best contact would be?
Sure. People can reach me on Twitter. First name, last name, Raphael Valat.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter too, obviously, Paul W. Franks. You'll find me there. And you know, if you're a scientist, then look me up on PubMed, and you'll find no end of publications there to understand what we've been doing.
I looked up yourself on, actually I didn't even look yourself up initially. I was looking up papers and I just had your name there, and then all of a sudden clicked on it and I was like, oh God, okay, I got to have an extra hour of reading time, which would have affected my sleep. So I've got to put that to the side for a moment.
I might put you
I love it, mate. Don't get me wrong. I love it. Guys, I'm Dan_Churchill on Instagram. If you want to join ZOE, which we highly recommend, obviously, based on the information you've heard today, you can simply go to joinzoe.com. We have the wonderful opportunity to give you 10% off by going and including Gut Check Series in the code. So Gut Check Series at joinzoe.com. Professor Paul, Dr. Raphael, wonderful to chat to you both today. Looking forward to seeing more and more research and talking more about sleep and obviously things such as precision nutrition. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.